In 1986, the slasher subgenre was in somewhat of a strange place. The self-appointed golden age of the slasher movie was drawing to a close. Subgenre juggernauts like Halloween and Friday the 13th were struggling to stay relevant in the face of diminishing box office returns, increasingly disinterested general audiences, and new competition. And of course, a new kid on the block calling himself Freddy Krueger was indelibly making his mark on the slasher movie. The slasher landscape was changing. It was time to adapt or die. Enter Slaughter High, an obscure 1986 slasher which responded appropriately to these shifting tides and new trends by doing absolutely none of that. Yes, Slaughter High is a truly riotous celebration of what made the golden age of slashers great. Almost like a last hurrah for the style, complete with all the tropes and cliches you know and hopefully love, alongside creative kills, some darkly comic sensibilities, a very memorable main theme, and a truly iconic, one-of-a-kind killer. It's a real shame that this didn't receive a ton of sequels, and has largely been relegated to obscurity outside the memories of die-hard slasher fans. And whilst we're not unearthing some immaculate horror treasure here, I'd like to take a little bit of time to speak about both why this is a genuinely underrated mid-80s slasher, but also about why it may be important in assessing the evolution of the slasher subgenre as a whole. That's right, we have some big fish to fry today, so we best get started. And as ever, we're going to have to leave the halls of Slaughter High for the foreseeable future, and start off with our own little history lesson. Let's return back to 1986. As I alluded to in the opening, what was commonly regarded as the golden age of the slasher had come to an end. The period is generally regarded as having taken place from 1978 to 1984. And if you want to be really specific, I personally believe that we can narrow those dates even further. From the 25th of October 1978 with the release of John Carpenter's Halloween, to the 9th of November 1984 with the release of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Hyperbolic as these completely subjective distinctions may be, what I seek to establish first and foremost is that the golden age of slashers is not just a term used to refer to the quality of movies releasing during this period by fans, but the explosion in popularity that the subgenre experienced. The slasher was the horror subgenre of choice for the new generation. Thrilling, paranoid, and most importantly, relatable. High schools, colleges, and small towns were the most common settings, and the characters were designed to somewhat resemble the audiences these films primarily targeted. Teenagers and young adults were going out to see them in theatres, and with the advent of VHS, they were able to bring rented titles into their home. But after 6 years of slashers having flooded the cinema and video market, audience interest began to wane slightly. The subgenre was not as lucrative as it once was. So just as the golden age was heralded by the emergence of Carpenter's Halloween in 1978, the era would be brought to a relatively definitive close with Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street, which marked not only the end of this stage in slasher history, but it was also indicative of a stylistic shift that the genre would later undergo. Let me elaborate. When you follow the development and history of a subgenre for so long, patterns naturally begin to emerge. And the slasher has died and revived itself so many times that I imagine it must be something like the undead zombie Jason of Jason Lives by this point. We can see the genesis of the slasher movie in Psycho and Peeping Tom, the crystallization of its tropes and structure in Halloween, the creation of the 90s teen-oriented slasher in Scream, and, to a significantly lesser degree, the craze for what Scream 5 would dub as requels born out of Halloween's own 2018 revival. None of these films set out to start a revolution with the goal of being trailblazers, providing the blueprint from which scores of films would pull from over the decades. But nonetheless, they did, and we have to treat them accordingly, as historical landmarks in the evolution of the slasher subgenre. As such, they also provide a succinct document for where the slasher was during this period and what the subgenre's influences were, what the culture of the period was like, what audience actually wanted from the subgenre. Obviously, these are films first, they are entertainment to be watched and enjoyed. but the potential in documenting these stylistic shifts and trends within the subgenre make them fascinating outside of that entertainment. With that in mind, let's return to A Nightmare on Elm Street. Elm Street is incredibly interesting in how it simultaneously closes out the period of increased output and widespread interest in the slasher movie, whilst also preempting the stylistic shifts and new trends to dominate the subgenre in the coming years. The supernaturally fueled plot and cursed killer was the exception in the Golden Age, the unusual outlier compared to the far more human and grounded threats that were typically found. There were exceptions, of course, and even the original Halloween dabbles slightly in vaguely supernatural elements in its harrowing conclusion. But it's in the years after the Golden Age that the supernatural slasher becomes far more prevalent. Retrospectively, A Nightmare on Elm Street feels like a changing of the guard, an indicator of things to come. Using the larger franchise slashers as an indication for this general trend proves especially interesting. By 1988, both the Halloween and Friday the 13th franchises were explicitly implementing stronger supernatural elements, the former introducing the much reviled Cult of Thorns storyline, and the latter resurrecting Jason Voorhees in 1986 in the franchise highlight and absolute masterpiece Part 6, Jason Lives. That's not to suggest that there were no supernatural slashers before the new year was rung in 1985, but there seemed to be a steady increase in these films as the Golden Age came to a close. For example, the period from 1985 to 1990 gave us Slumber Party Massacre 2, Child's Play, Prom Night 2, Hello Mary Sue, Scarecrows, Shocker, Cemetery of Terror, Bad Dreams, the list goes on and on. It's a distinction in style that largely separates this period from the American classics that defined the Golden Age, even if the general tone and structure of these films hasn't changed significantly between this Golden Age and the back half of the 1980s. As such, the differences I've gone to a certain degree of effort to trace and establish may seem incredibly slight, especially compared to the monolithic impact of films like Halloween and the encroaching shadow of Craven's Scream far off in the horizon. But regardless, it's still important to establish these shifts in the evolution of the genre, even if they are, well, somewhat slight. Keep in mind that I don't want to give the impression that A Nightmare on Elm Street is solely responsible for these trends. The more outlandish development of the bigger franchises could reasonably be attributed to declining interest and creative fatigue. And 1987's A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors, was significantly more successful than its two predecessors, and thus significantly more likely to actually influence any future filmmakers. But I do think that it suitably marks the conclusion of the Golden Age in announcing its end and foreshadowing its immediate future. And where does Slaughter High come into this? Well, it arguably serves as being somewhat of a bridge between these two eras, an outlier of the style popularised in its own time period, but far more indebted to the sensibilities of the Golden Age, both an early 80s and late 80s slasher at once, fixed between two worlds. And the evolution of the slasher film is a fascinating example of this changing of the guard, an example of how prevalent and well beloved the Golden Age was amongst the filmmakers who were inspired by it. As I said earlier, it's a true, sincere celebration of the films that defined the horror output of a nation for over half a decade, and will continue to disrupt and endure until the present day. And that's why we're talking about it. That's why I've spent this time establishing my own opinions on its historical context and its place in the evolution of the slasher film. But also, we're talking about Slaughter High because it, for lack of a better word, rules.
Marty hasn't forgotten a thing. He's giving them a blast from the past they'll never forget. Marty Ranson is still a dork, but tonight he's getting even. Vestron Pictures presents Slaughter High.
Slaughter High, originally titled April Fool's Day until competition with Paramount Pictures necessitated the change to the current title, revels in its Golden Age slasher roots, readily indulging in all the cliches and tropes that come with it, always proud to be a part of that lineage. We have a high school setting, a prank gone wrong, the prank's unfortunate victim returning for revenge, a series of bloody and elaborate kills, a chase sequence involving the final girl making her escape from the killer, The bare bones of this movie is the classic American Golden Age slasher distilled into a single film. It's not winning any points for narrative originality, but the film, appropriately, doesn't care about that in the slightest. Slaughter High is simply content with having fun. And damn, this film is so much fun. In saying that, I should probably give a quick overview of the film's plot, which, like the majority of the very best 80s American slashers, can be easily summarised in a few sentences. Marty, a young high school student with a talent for science, is tricked into a cruel prank that sees him humiliated. As if this wasn't enough, his fellow students conspire to sabotage an experiment which results in him being doused in deadly acid and quickly rushed off to hospital. This, naturally, drives young Marty mad, and he plots his revenge by inviting his old tormentors to a school reunion designed just for them, on the anniversary of his accident, April Fool's Day. As is to be expected, murder and mayhem ensues. Simplicity is the order of the day in the film's plot, but it's that relative simplicity that works to the film's advantage. There's the incident which sets the killer into motion, the initial build-up which sees tensions rising inside the abandoned school, and at the 40-minute mark, all hell breaks loose, and the film transforms from a fairly enjoyable slow-burning slasher into an absolute blast. The pacing kicks into overdrive, the characters begin to be picked off left, right and centre, and the deserted hallways of the old school come to be filled with Marty's cackling, elated laughter. It seems best now to move on to the meat of the movie, what we've all been waiting patiently for, the horror, the actual slashing itself. As I alluded to earlier, this is a slasher which delivers on the bloody mayhem that fans come to expect from the genre, with some fantastic practical effects and a wicked sense of imagination to match. There seemed to be almost something of a competition between the film's writers to see who could come up with the most ridiculous, outside-the-box kill idea, and you'll be seeing everything from soda can stomach explosions to acid baths to the most innovative use of electricity this side of Herbert West's laboratory in Reanimator. Not only are these outrageous ideas novel in of themselves, however, but they also make contextual sense for the film's deranged honor student killer, Marty. Being a self-professed master of science, it makes perfect sense that he should utilise his unique talents in dispatching the main cast, transforming the materials for innocent science experiments into murderous weapons of destruction, instead of opting for the more traditional methods of slashing. This handily allows the film to distinguish itself from its contemporaries, and establish Marty as an interesting and memorable slasher villain in his own right. Each of the iconic slasher villains are so immediately distinctive because the personalities are revealed through the way in which they kill. Think of the slow, methodical stalking of Michael Myers, the ferocity and persistence of Jason Voorhees, even the sneering, energetic driller killer from the Slumber Party Massacre 2. Hell, I'd argue that one of the only modern slashers to understand this are the Terrifier movies, particularly the third installment. I won't go so far as to say that a slasher film is only as good as its main villain, but they are inarguably the focal point of their respective movies, the figure that dominates the film. And Slaughter High clearly understands this. Full marks all round. Marty is, of course, not quite as iconic as a Michael Myers or a Jason Voorhees, nor does the film believe that he should be. But as a slasher villain, he's very engaging, to the point where your sympathies are likely more often with the long-suffering student turned serial killer than they are with his tormentors. The jester outfit he wears perfectly complements both the April Fool's Day setting and the descent into madness that Marty has experienced since the inciting events of the movie. It also adds a nice twist of irony to the proceedings, given that the victim of the opening prank has now transformed himself into the prankster, and those who bullied him have now lost control. It's remarkable how the film manages to make the nerdy, unsure, comic figure from the film's opening into someone genuinely threatening and dangerous by its end. Simon Scudamore's performance as Marty is phenomenal, by far the best in the film, as imbued with a genuine sense of tragedy when considering the real-life circumstances of his suicide by drug overdose, which occurred shortly after the film wrapped. It should be mentioned that this film has a genuine mean streak that also helps to set it apart from many slashers of this and the previous era. For starters, basically all of the lead characters in this are just the worst, which, strange as it seems, works to the film's advantage. I'd much rather have a series of characters who are awful and memorable, as opposed to simply being bland and forgettable. And Slaughter High understands that sympathetic characters are not a necessity for this type of movie. In fact, it arguably allows the film to indulge in a far more creative and violent array of gruesome deaths. Of course, there's still an element of lightness and fun to counteract the film's mean streak, most notably the brief moments of self-parody and dark humour, which occasionally helps the film border on something akin to a trauma production than anything too self-serious. It's a tonal tightrope not easily walked, but the film manages it with seemingly very little difficulty, and is all the better for it. That tonal tightrope persists in the film's awesome main theme, which combines Harry Manfredini's brooding, eerie horror synths with a punk rock lead, effortlessly intertwining the film's sense of fun and moments of cruel violence into an immediately memorable song, and it's also just incredibly catchy. The ending is also a particular highlight of the film, with the cast stripped back to just Marty and the film's final girl, Carol. The two engage in a thrilling chase sequence around the abandoned halls of the high school as dawn begins to break outside. Sunlight starts to flood through the windows and illuminate the building. In spite of my admiration for the bloody mayhem that the film prioritizes up until this point, the atmosphere and the impressive tracking shot following the chase ensures that it is a remarkably tense experience to close out the movie. That tension only being heightened by the film's relatively unexpected conclusion, that of Marty actually triumphing in the end. A decidedly atypical end to this iconoclastic slasher. Hopefully, I've convinced you that Slaughter High is entirely worth your time and attention, purely down to sheer entertainment value alone. It really is just a great time from start to finish. But to return to the bigger picture, I hope that its place in the evolution of the slasher has been just as well established. It's a minor footnote in that storied history, I'll admit, but that does not mean it should be forgotten entirely. It is a record of where the slasher had been previously, in the Golden Age, perhaps even looking forward to the places it would soon go. It's a record of the styles and the tropes that were valued. And, above all else, evidence that the Golden Age slasher never really died entirely. There's been a fair bit of talk recently about the modern slasher revival, the return to form and popularity that the subgenre needed to remain relevant in the modern day. And, quite honestly, I think it's okay to be a little skeptical of that. I mean, personally, I'm a little skeptical of it. Whilst I wholeheartedly enjoy quite a few of the modern slashers that have hit screens over the past few years, I don't think we'll ever see that late 70s, early 80s slasher boom that sustained the subgenre for so long. Horror is moving to new places, and a great deal of these modern slasher films seem all too content to be tethered to past glories. But overall, I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, something to be distraught over, because the spirit of those older titles, the Golden Age and its immediate fallout, lives on. In devoted fans, in online review and discussion, in rescreenings and film clubs, in the Blu-ray or the DVD or the VHS tape. Like Marty, the slasher simply will not stay dead. It just keeps getting back up for one more swing.
I'm gonna get you.